Welcome to our lesson on aerobic cellular respiration. This is really just an overview, and that's all you're really going to need to know for Reg Bio. So aerobic means using oxygen, and cellular respiration is the process that releases energy from food in the presence of oxygen. So we need to have oxygen present in order to do all of this. So kind of the overview chemical equation part of this is that if oxygen is available when organisms eat their food, then a process called cellular respiration is going to break that down. So in symbols, we have 6O2 plus C6H12O6 yielding 6 CO2s and 6 H2Os, and we're going to get energy. And of course, this energy is going to be ATP. This isn't really part of the chemical equation per se, but we can add it in so that we know that we're getting ATP out. Many times people will put kind of an arrow here telling us that we are getting ATP, or energy. In words, we just say oxygen plus glucose is going to give us carbon dioxide, water, and energy. And again, usually that energy is moved over here to give us ATP, or energy. This is just, it is a product, but it's not a chemical product of this reaction. So let's look a little bit closer at cellular respiration. There are 3 stages of cellular respiration. The first one is glycolysis, which is going to happen in the cytoplasm of the cell. And then we're going to move to what we've known as the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria. And in the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain take place. So let's look at each of these 3 stages. First is glycolysis. And this occurs, as I said, in the cytoplasm of the cell. Glucose is broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. So these molecules right here are pyruvic acid. And you can see that basically we've just taken glucose and broken it in half. When we do that, we get a small amount of energy released, and that energy is released in the form of ATP. Now, in order to do this process, we put 2 ATP in so that we can break this glucose apart, and then out of it we get 4 ATP. And that's going to give us a net gain of 2 ATP during glycolysis. Also during glycolysis, we're going to release a couple of hydrogens. And those hydrogens are going to be carried by a molecule called NAD+. And those 2 hydrogens are each going to make an NADH molecule. And we're going to use those later in a different process. But it is good to know that, I find my pen here, that we are also making NADH. The next process is the Krebs cycle. Remember that the Krebs cycle is taking place in the mitochondria, and it's taking place in what we call the matrix of the mitochondria. Remember that the mitochondria has 2 membranes, an outer membrane and an inner membrane. And this inner membrane has folds on it called cristae. And the cristae are going to increase the amount of surface area for our next process. Inside of that inner membrane, we have this membranous space called the matrix. So this is the matrix. During the Krebs cycle, we're going to go through this process twice. Once each for each of these pyruvic acid. So this pyruvic acid will go through the Krebs cycle, and then this pyruvic acid will also go through the Krebs cycle. So for each glucose, we're going to go through this process twice. carbons are going to get broken off of the pyruvic acid during this process. And after we break off the carbons, we release them as carbon dioxide. So if we remember back to our equation, we are releasing, or we are making, carbon dioxide. We are also producing 2 more ATP during this process. Once for each of the pyruvic acid. So a total of 2 during the Krebs cycle. We are also breaking off several more hydrogens from each of the pyruvic acid. And again, these are going to be carried by 2 carrier molecules, NAD plus and a new one, FAD plus 2. And so when those 2 carrier molecules grab a hydrogen, they're going to make NADH and FADH2. And those hydrogens, again, are going to be used later. So we had glycolysis in the cytoplasm, the Krebs cycle, which takes place in the matrix of the mitochondria, and now we're going to go to the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain is going to take place on the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And it'll happen, that's why we want a big surface area here, so that we can have several electron transport chains in the same mitochondria. During the electron transport chain, this is when we're going to have the bulk of our energy produced. All of the NADH and FADH2s that we brought from previous steps, so we had 1 coming from glucose, or we had 2 NADHs coming from glucose. We had NADH and FADH2 coming from the Krebs cycle. These are going to go into our electron transport chain, and it's really the movement of the hydrogens that is going to produce our energy. This is also the portion of cellular respiration that requires oxygen. And the oxygen is going to combine with those hydrogens that are brought there by our carrier molecules. And they're going to produce water. And water then is going to be released. So we have water released, and we are bringing in oxygen to the electron transport chain. As hydrogens move around and get put with water, we are producing 30 to 34 ATP. So we have 30 to 34 ATP. And so that's why oxygen is so important to us. Without oxygen, we would only be getting these 2 ATP up here in glycolysis. But with oxygen, we then can go through the Krebs cycle, make 2 more ATP, and then also go through the electron transport chain and make 30 to 34. So remember that aerobic processes are reactions that require oxygen. Both the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain are considered aerobic processes. They are different chemical reactions that require oxygen to be present. Those processes that don't require oxygen are called anaerobic. And if anaerobic is not present, or if oxygen is not present, then the cells will go through anaerobic respiration. But we always go through glycolysis. Glycolysis is anaerobic. It does not require oxygen. But it is still considered a part of cellular respiration because we need it for the 2 pyruvic acids to go into the Krebs cycle. That's the end of today's lesson. Make sure that you understand these 3 processes. Really, what's important is what goes in and what goes out. Have a good night.